The field of policing can be a very demanding one, to say the least. Most officers, or if not all officers, will be faced with a situation on many occasions where they must use their authority of discretion to make rightful decisions in the name of law and order. Whether officers are rightfully enforcing the law, however, have become an ongoing question of debate. Time and time again, there have been various occurrences of wrongful acts throughout police agencies, such as police brutality, which have been heavily scrutinized by both public and media outlets. So from here we can perhaps conclude that, to a certain extent, there is a presence of police corruption throughout various law enforcement agencies. It is important to note, however, that we as a society cannot paint all officers with the same colored brush, solely based off the wrongful actions of a few. Yet in that same regard, we cannot assume, unfortunately, that all officers are morally good. This is where the presence of ethics within the law enforcement field begins to establish a vital role. And this will primarily be the focus of discussion in this video, which will touch upon the ethical dilemmas and decisions that officers are faced with while on and off duty, as well as why ethics training is important towards enforcing the law in a fair, ethical manner. Alright, so we're going to start this discussion off with a few basics. So, what exactly is ethics? Well, ethics can be defined as the discipline of determining good and evil and defining moral good. In other words, in regard to law enforcement, it pertains toward the idea of recognizing whether the actions of an officer are right or wrong. How we determine the right and wrong doings of an officer, quite honestly, is seen as a bit of a gray area to deal with. And what I mean by that is, there is no real concrete method of resolving an ethical conflict. This was something that I struggled to understand myself, as I was being introduced to the idea of ethics in policing. I often question certain areas of ethics pertaining to law enforcement, and rightfully so, because, in reality, there is no real answer. That's why it's so important to understand that your discretion as a police officer is able to uphold the law in a rightful manner. Throughout many law enforcement agencies, there are a set of guidelines which concern toward the importance of ethics, formerly known as the Police Code of Conduct. This Code of Conduct emphasizes the universal principles of fairness, service, importance of the law, and personal conduct of officers on the line of duty. However, an issue which lies within police culture that interferes with maintaining these principles is what is known as noble cause corruption. This refers to where the end of crime fighting justifies the means which may be illegal or unethical. So a great example of this would be when an officer falsely obtains a search warrant. In some cases, officers will go beyond the barriers of their lawful constitution by falsely obtaining a search warrant, so that they can search an individual who they think is suspected of a crime. An element within police culture which is vital for maintaining police relationships is loyalty. This presence of loyalty, you could say, promotes a don't give up on a cop mentality. Therefore, in that regard, the code of silence is established within the culture of policing. This is yet another ethical issue which refers to upholding the law in a fair manner, because it influences officers to not come forward when they are aware of ethical wrongdoings of their peers. So now we know that the code of conduct can be helpful toward reducing police corruption. And not only that, but it also builds a sense of trust within the community that they serve. But how can the presence of ethics in policing help officers make rightful decisions? Well, to help answer that question, there are two types of ethical systems which can help define moral duty. Deontological and teleological are the ethical systems which focus on determining moral good. Deontological systems describe an act as being considered as morally good, as long as the actor does it with good intentions, and potential consequences in this case are disregarded. Teleological systems, on the other hand, concern the consequences of an action to determine moral good, even if the action itself was considered bad. The use of either of these ethical systems in policing should be noted that they each possess various flaws, as neither of them provide a clear way to resolve conflict. It's important to understand, as an officer, that both the intents and consequences of an action should be considered when making a decision to determine moral good, or potential punishment or fine towards an individual. So something we can conclude from all this is that it's important for law enforcement agencies to only hire those who demonstrate strong moral values and ethical beliefs. Unfortunately, despite the efforts to achieve this, occurrences of police misconduct in some cases cannot be prevented. However, not only will maintaining a high standard of ethical conduct deter the presence of police misconduct, but public trust can be strengthened, which thus helps ensure the safety and tranquility of our communities. And that, folks, will close today's discussion on ethics in policing. I hope that those who watched this will now have a better understanding on how ethics plays an ongoing role in enforcing the law as a police officer. Anyways, thanks for watching.